My sister's husband stood in my kitchen, looked me dead in the eye, and told me I needed to vacate my own beach house by the end of the weekend because his family deserved it more than I did. 24 hours later, I watched his face drain of color as he realized exactly who he had just tried to evict. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You know that specific kind of family member who marries into your life and immediately starts rearranging everything like they own the place? That was Derek Holloway, my older sister Vanessa's husband of 3 years. The kind of man who wore his success like a weapon, who measured worth in square footage and salary figures, who had never met a conversation he couldn't dominate or a room he couldn't command. The Morrison family reunion happened every 4th of July weekend, and this year I had volunteered my beach house in Carmel by the Sea as the gathering spot. It seemed like a generous gesture at the time, a way to bring everyone together in a beautiful location where the cypress trees bent toward the Pacific, and the fog rolled in like a living thing every evening. I had purchased the property 2 years earlier, a modest 3-bedroom cottage with weathered shingles and a wraparound deck that caught the sunset perfectly. It was my sanctuary, the place I retreated to when the noise of the world became too much, when I needed to remember who I was beneath all the roles I played for other people. The family started arriving on Thursday afternoon. My parents came first, Dad hauling coolers from their SUV while Mom fussed about whether she had packed enough sunscreen. My younger brother Marcus showed up an hour later with his fiancée, both of them still in that blissful stage where everything the other person does seems charming. Then came Vanessa and Derek, pulling up in his black Mercedes SUV with custom plates that read Closer One, a reference to his career in pharmaceutical sales that he explained to anyone who would listen and many who would not. Vanessa had always been the golden child in our family, the one who did everything right at exactly the right time. Cheerleader in high school, sorority president in college, married to a successful man before she turned 30, beautiful home in the suburbs of San Jose, 2 perfect children who attended the best private school in the county. She had followed the script our parents had written without a single deviation, and the reward was their constant approval and pride. She floated through life collecting achievements like some people collect seashells, displaying them prominently for everyone to admire. I had taken a different path, one that confused and occasionally worried my parents. After college I had pursued work that meant something to me rather than work that impressed other people. I lived modestly, drove a 7-year-old Subaru, wore simple clothes that prioritized function over fashion, and generally declined to participate in the constant status competition that seemed to define my sister's social world. To my family, I remained something of an enigma, a puzzle they had long since stopped trying to solve. They knew I worked in emergency management and disaster response, but the specifics of my role remained vague in their understanding. When people asked what I did at family gatherings, Mom would wave her hand vaguely and say something about coordination and logistics, her tone suggesting she was not entirely sure herself and was too polite to press for details. The first evening at the beach house unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Dad grilled steaks on the deck while Mom prepared her famous potato salad in my kitchen, commenting every few minutes about how I really should update the appliances. Marcus and his fiancée walked along the beach, their laughter carrying back on the wind. Vanessa's children, 8-year-old Madison and 6-year-old Connor, played in the sand while their parents supervised from deck chairs, drinks in hand. Derek held court throughout dinner, regaling everyone with stories from his latest sales conference in Scottsdale, dropping names of executives and describing restaurants with Michelin stars. He had a particular talent for making every story somehow reflect his own importance, his own success, his own superiority. When Marcus mentioned a promotion at his engineering firm, Derek managed to turn the conversation back to his own career within 3 sentences. When Mom complimented the house, Derek launched into a detailed analysis of the Carmel real estate market, and how properties like mine were actually underperforming investments compared to what he had done with his portfolio. I mostly stayed quiet as I usually did during these gatherings. I had learned years ago that engaging with Derek was exhausting and pointless. He did not have conversations so much as he performed monologues that occasionally paused for applause. Vanessa seemed to have learned to tune him out, smiling pleasantly while her eyes glazed over, her mind clearly somewhere else entirely. I sometimes wondered what their marriage actually looked like behind closed doors, whether he was equally insufferable in private or if this was a persona he adopted for audiences. After dinner, while I was cleaning up in the kitchen, Derek wandered in and leaned against the counter in that casual way that somehow still managed to feel intrusive. He watched me load the dishwasher for a moment before speaking. "This is a pretty nice setup you have here," he said, gesturing vaguely at the house around us. "Must have cost you what, 700,000? Maybe 750? Something like that," I replied, not looking up from the plates I was rinsing. "Good bones, needs updating though. Kitchen is pretty dated. Bathroom's probably original. You could add another 200,000 in value with the right renovations." He paused, swirling the bourbon in his glass. "Of course, that would require capital you probably don't have access to in your line of work." I set down the plate I was holding and turned to face him. "The house suits my needs just fine as it is." Sure, he said quickly, his tone suggesting he was being magnanimous and not pressing the point. "I just mean from an investment perspective, you are leaving money on the table. But hey, not everyone thinks about real estate strategically. Vanessa and we have always been more business-minded about these things." This was vintage Derek. Every interaction somehow became an opportunity to establish hierarchy, to remind you that he occupied a higher rung on whatever ladder he had decided mattered. I had watched him do this to Marcus countless times, subtly diminishing my brother's engineering career by comparing it unfavorably to his own sales achievements. He did it to Dad too, though more carefully, usually by praising Dad's solid middle-class values, in a tone that made clear he had transcended such modest aspirations. I turned back to the dishes without responding. Some people need the last word, and I had long since decided Derek could have all the last words he wanted. They cost me nothing. But he was not finished. He took another sip of his bourbon and continued, his voice taking on a speculative quality that I would later recognize as the sound of a man working up to something. "You know, Vanessa and I were talking," he began, and I felt my shoulders tense slightly. Nothing good ever followed that particular preamble. This house would actually be perfect for our family. The kids are getting older. They need space to spread out during summer. And with my parents getting up there in age, it would be great to have a place where multiple generations could gather. Really create some memories, you know? I continued rinsing dishes, waiting for the actual point to emerge from beneath the pleasantries. "The thing is," he continued, warming to his topic now, "you are here by yourself most of the time. Seems like kind of a waste, honestly. All this space for one person who is barely even here from what Vanessa tells me. You are always off doing your emergency management thing, traveling for work, responding to disasters or whatever. This place just sits empty." I set down the dish towel and turned to face him fully. "What exactly are you suggesting, Derek?" He smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "I am saying that it would make more sense for Vanessa and the kids to use the house on a more regular basis. They could come down on weekends, holidays, really get some use out of it. You could still come occasionally, of course, when you are not working. We would be happy to coordinate schedules." The audacity of the suggestion hit me like a physical thing. He was proposing that I essentially surrender my own home to his family for their convenience while I graciously accepted occasional visitation rights. "This is my house, Derek," I said, keeping my voice level. "I bought it. I own it. I am not looking to share it on a rotating schedule." His expression shifted slightly, the friendly facade cracking just enough to reveal something harder underneath. "I think you are being a little selfish here, Julia. Family is supposed to share resources. You have something the family could benefit from, but you are hoarding it for yourself." "Hoarding it," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air between us. "Yes," he said firmly, apparently satisfied that he had found the right framing. "You are prioritizing your own comfort over what would be best for the family collectively. Vanessa and I have been very generous over the years, hosting holidays, providing opportunities for family gatherings. It seems like the least you could do is reciprocate by making this space available." I stared at him, genuinely amazed at the mental gymnastics required to transform his desire to use my property into a moral obligation on my part. "Derek, you host holidays at your house because it is your house. I am not obligated to hand over mine as some kind of reciprocal arrangement I never agreed to." His jaw tightened. "You know what your problem is, Julia? You have never understood how family is supposed to work. You have always been off doing your own thing, keeping yourself separate, acting like you are above everyone else with your mysterious career and your private little life. Meanwhile, the rest of us are actually building something together, supporting each other, creating connections. By demanding access to my property, I said flatly. By sharing resources, he corrected. But I can see you are too stubborn to understand the difference. The kitchen had gone very quiet. I became aware that the conversation on the deck had stopped, that people were probably listening through the open windows. Derek seemed to realize it too, and he raised his voice slightly, playing to the audience now. I think it would be best, he said, his tone shifting to something more formal and authoritative, if Vanessa and the kids stayed here for the rest of the weekend while you made other arrangements. Give everyone some space to cool down. You can come back next week and we will discuss a more permanent sharing arrangement then. I felt my entire body go still. You are telling me to leave my own house. I am suggesting that you give your family some space, he said, as if there were any meaningful difference. The house is big enough for everyone, but your attitude is making things uncomfortable. It would just be easier if you found somewhere else to stay for a few days. Before I could respond, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. She looked between us, her expression carefully neutral in that way she had perfected over years of managing Derek's various social disasters. What is going on in here? She asked lightly. Nothing, Derek said quickly. Julia and I were just discussing logistics for the weekend. She was actually just saying she might head back to the city early. Work stuff, you know how it is. The lie was so smooth and casual that I almost admired the audacity of it. He was now rewriting the conversation in real time, transforming his demand into my voluntary departure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Vanessa looked at me, a question in her eyes. I could have corrected the record right then, could have exposed his manipulation in front of her. But I knew from experience that Vanessa had an infinite capacity to rationalize Derek's behavior. She would find some way to make this my fault, to suggest that I had misunderstood or overreacted or failed to see his good intentions. It was easier for her to believe that I was difficult than to acknowledge what she had married. Actually, I said quietly, I am not going anywhere. This is my house. Derek's expression hardened. Julia, do not make this difficult. We are trying to have a nice family weekend, and you are turning it into a drama. I am turning it into a drama, I repeated, my voice still calm but with an edge now that I made no effort to soften. By declining to vacate my own home at your demand. See, this is exactly what I am talking about, Derek said, turning to Vanessa as if she were the judge in this dispute. She cannot even have a reasonable conversation without getting defensive and confrontational. Mom appeared behind Vanessa now, drawn by the raised voices. What is happening? Why is everyone arguing? We are not arguing, Derek said smoothly. Julia is just being inflexible about some scheduling logistics. She is having trouble with the concept of family sharing. I saw my mother's expression shift, that familiar look of disappointment crossing her face. To her, family harmony was the highest good. And anyone who disrupted it was automatically in the wrong regardless of the underlying facts. The specific details did not matter. What mattered was that there was conflict, and someone needed to be the bigger person and make it stop. Julia, Mom said gently, maybe it would be easier if you just stayed somewhere else for a few days. Your father and I could get a hotel room too if that would help. We do not need to make a big thing out of this. And there it was. The reflexive instinct to smooth things over by asking the less aggressive party to simply yield. Derek knew exactly how to play this dynamic, knew that if he remained calm while making outrageous demands, I would be cast as the unreasonable one for refusing. No, I said, the single word hanging in the kitchen air like a declaration of war. Derek's eyes narrowed. No. No, I repeated, looking directly at him now. I am not leaving my house. You and Vanessa and the kids are welcome to stay as my guests through the weekend as originally planned. But this is my home, and I am not surrendering it because you have decided your family deserves it more than I do. For just a moment, I saw genuine anger flash across Derek's face, the mask slipping enough to reveal what lived underneath. But he recovered quickly, transforming the anger into a look of wounded innocence. I cannot believe how selfish you are being right now, he said, his voice taking on an injured quality. After everything we do for this family, after how much Vanessa bends over backward to include you in things even though you barely make an effort, this is how you repay us? By refusing a simple request to share your space for a few days? It was not a request, I said quietly. It was a demand. And the answer is no. Vanessa put her hand on Derek's arm, a gesture I recognized as her attempt to de-escalate before he said something they would both regret. Maybe we should just drop this, she said softly. We can talk about it later when everyone has calmed down. But Derek was not interested in de-escalation. He shook off her hand and took a step toward me, his body language aggressive now in a way that made Mom gasp slightly. You know what? He said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the silent kitchen. I have tried to be patient with you, Julia. We all have. But you make it impossible. You sit there in your little isolated world, acting like you are better than everyone else, refusing to participate in normal family dynamics. You are not some tragic misunderstood hero. You are just selfish and small, and honestly, this family would probably be better off if you just stayed in your lane and stopped pretending you matter as much as the rest of us. The words landed like physical blows. I heard Mom make a small sound of distress. Vanessa looked at the floor, her face flushed with either shame or agreement, I could not tell which. From somewhere in the house, I heard Dad's footsteps, drawn by the confrontation. And I stood there, dish towel still in my hands, looking at this man who had married into my family, and somehow decided he had the authority to tell me where I did and did not belong. Part of me wanted to respond, to match his aggression with my own, to tear into him with all the observations I had accumulated over 3 years of watching him bulldoze through every interaction with his toxic combination of arrogance and insecurity. But I had learned something important over the years of work Derek knew nothing about. I had learned that there are moments when silence is not weakness but strategy. When the most powerful response is simply to absorb the blow and wait. Because people who cannot control their anger always eventually reveal themselves, and the surest way to make them do it faster is to deny them the reaction they are seeking. So I folded the dish towel carefully, set it on the counter, and walked past Derek toward my bedroom at the back of the house. I did not slam doors or throw objects or deliver a devastating parting line. I simply removed myself from the situation with the same calm I had maintained throughout, leaving Derek standing in my kitchen still waiting for the explosion that would never come. Behind me, I heard voices rising again. Dad's deep rumble mixing with Derek's defensive explanations and Vanessa's placating murmurs. I closed my bedroom door on all of it and sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly through the adrenaline that made my heart race and my hands shake slightly. The beach house was quiet at this end, away from the drama unfolding in the kitchen and living room. Through my window I could see the ocean, dark and vast under the evening sky. Waves rolling in with that eternal patience that made human drama seem small and temporary. The fog was starting to gather on the horizon, the first wisps of it reaching toward shore like tentative fingers. I had not planned on this confrontation, had not wanted it. But now that it had happened I felt something shifting inside me. 4 years I had accepted my family's fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I did. I had let them believe I was some kind of well-meaning but ultimately insignificant person who worked in emergency management, which they vaguely understood as coordinating Red Cross responses or managing logistics for local disasters. They did not know and had never asked about the real scope of my work, about the credentials I held, about the situations I had walked into and the decisions I had made when everything was falling apart and someone needed to hold the center. They did not know because I had never told them. Privacy and professional discretion had become such deeply ingrained habits that I had extended them even to my own family, letting them assume I was less than I was rather than correcting their misconceptions. It had seemed easier that way, cleaner, less complicated than trying to explain work that touched on classified operations in sensitive situations where my role needed to remain quiet. But Derek's words echoed in my head now, particularly that final accusation. You are just selfish and small, and honestly, this family would probably be better off if you just stayed in your lane and stopped pretending you matter as much as the rest of us. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts, scrolling to a name I had not called in months. Dr. Patricia Chan, my former supervisor at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and current director of the California Office of Emergency Services. We had worked together during the worst disaster response operation of our careers, and she had been trying to recruit me back to government work ever since I had transitioned to private consulting 2 years ago. The phone rang 3 times before she answered, her voice warm and immediately recognizable. Julia Morrison, as I live and breathe. To what do I owe the pleasure? Hi, Patricia, I said, surprised at how much relief I felt just hearing her voice. I hope I am not calling too late. For you? Never. What is going on? You sound strange. I hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretending everything was fine. Family reunion gone wrong. My brother-in-law just tried to evict me from my own beach house, and then told me I do not matter as much as the rest of them. There was a pause, and then Patricia's laugh came through the phone, not unkind but genuinely amused. Oh honey, do they have any idea who you actually are? No, I admitted. And I have never corrected them. Well, Patricia said thoughtfully, maybe it is time you did. We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the time we hung up, I had made a decision. Patricia had information I needed, contacts she was willing to mobilize, and a perspective that helped me see the situation more clearly. She also reminded me of something I had been in danger of forgetting over years of quiet service and deliberate obscurity. You saved 238 people during the Paradise Fire evacuation, she said before we disconnected. You coordinated the largest civilian rescue operation in California history. You worked 72 hours straight in conditions that broke trained firefighters. And when the governor wanted to pin a medal on you, you declined because you said the firefighters deserved recognition more. That kind of humility is admirable, Julia, but there is a line between humility and letting people who do not know you define you. Maybe your brother-in-law needs a reminder that family worth is not measured in sales commissions and real estate portfolios. When I emerged from my bedroom an hour later, the house had gone quiet. People had retreated to various corners, processing the evening's drama in their own ways. I found Dad on the deck, nursing a beer and looking out at the ocean. You okay, sweetheart? He asked when I sat down beside him. I will be, I said. He nodded, not pressing. Dad had never been good with emotional complexity, preferring practical problems he could solve with tools and physical labor. But he was a good man, steady and present in his way. Derek can be intense, he said finally, which was his version of acknowledging conflict without taking sides. Yes, I agreed. He can. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the waves. Finally, Dad said, your mother is worried. She thinks you and Vanessa are not going to recover from this. Vanessa and I will be fine, I said, though I was not entirely sure that was true. But Derek crossed a line tonight. Dad nodded slowly. He did. The admission surprised me enough that I looked at him directly. He met my eyes and said, I heard what he said to you. That last part about you not matching. That was wrong. He had no right. Something in my chest loosened slightly. Thank you for saying that. I should have said it to his face, Dad admitted. But I froze up. I am sorry about that. I reached over and squeezed his hand. It is okay, Dad. But it was not entirely okay, and we both knew it. The evening had revealed fault lines in the family structure that had probably been there all along, but that everyone had been too comfortable to acknowledge. Derek's aggression was just the most visible symptom of deeper issues about who got heard, who got valued, who got believed. Tomorrow was going to be interesting, because while my family slept in my beach house, convinced that I was some harmless mid-level administrator who worked in disaster logistics, I was making plans that would completely reshape their understanding of who I actually was. Derek had demanded I leave my beach house. He had told me I did not matter as much as the rest of them. Within 24 hours, he was going to regret both of those statements more than he could possibly imagine. The fog had fully rolled in by the time I woke the next morning, turning the world outside my window into a soft gray blur where the boundary between ocean and sky disappeared entirely. I lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the muffled sound of waves and the deeper quiet of a house full of people trying not to wake each other. The digital clock on my nightstand read 5:47, early enough that I could move through the morning undisturbed. I dressed in my running clothes and slipped out through the side door, leaving the house behind as I headed down the wooden stairs that led to the beach. The sand was cool and damp under my feet, packed firm by the retreating tide. I started jogging south along the waterline, my breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air, my mind beginning to sort through everything that had happened the previous evening. Running had always been my form of meditation, the repetitive motion and steady breathing creating space for thoughts to settle and clarify. This morning I needed that clarity more than usual because the conversation with Derek had opened something I had kept carefully sealed for a very long time. The question of how much of myself I owed to people who had never bothered to really know me, who had constructed a version of Julia Morrison that was comfortable for them, and then insisted I inhabit that construction rather than reveal my actual self. My family knew certain facts about me. They knew I had studied emergency management and public administration at Berkeley. They knew I had worked for FEMA for several years after graduation before transitioning to private consulting. They knew I traveled frequently for work and that I sometimes responded to disaster situations. They knew I lived modestly despite presumably earning a decent salary, that I was unmarried and seemed content that way, that I kept my personal life private to the point of opacity. What they did not know could fill volumes. They did not know that I held advanced certifications in incident command, hazardous materials response, urban search and rescue coordination, and mass casualty management. They did not know that I had led response operations in 6 major disasters across 3 continents. They did not know that my consulting work primarily involved training government agencies and private corporations on crisis response protocols, or that my client list included Fortune 500 companies, foreign governments, and the Department of Homeland Security. They did not know that during the Camp Fire that destroyed the town of Paradise, California, I had been the senior incident commander who coordinated the evacuation of more than 25,000 residents through a single highway corridor while the firestorm closed in from 3 sides. They did not know that I had worked for 72 consecutive hours without sleep managing resources from 14 different agencies, making moment-by-moment decisions about which roads to keep open and which neighborhoods to evacuate first, calculating in real time how many minutes we had before the fire would overtake specific locations. They did not know that the official death toll of 85 would have been in the hundreds without the evacuation protocols I had implemented in the first 4 hours of the incident. They did not know that the governor of California had personally called to thank me or that I had been offered the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and declined it because I genuinely believed the recognition belonged to the firefighters and first responders who had executed the operation rather than the person coordinating it from the command center. They did not know any of this because I had made a deliberate choice not to tell them. The decision had not been about false modesty or some misguided attempt to be mysterious, though I knew that was how Vanessa interpreted my privacy. It had been about maintaining necessary boundaries between my professional life and my personal identity. The work I did required a certain kind of emotional compartmentalization. When you spend your professional life immersed in worst-case scenarios, when you are the person who has to stay calm while everything burns or floods or collapses, when you carry the weight of knowing that your decisions directly determine who lives and who dies, you need some part of your life that exists outside that intensity. My family had always been that separate space. With them I could be just Julia, the younger daughter who was quiet and a bit odd but ultimately harmless. I did not have to carry the weight of my professional reputation, or live up to anyone's expectations about what a disaster response expert should be like. I could eat potato salad and watch my niece and nephew play in the sand, and listen to Dad's stories about his boat repair business without having to be the person who had seen buildings collapse on top of people or coordinated the evacuation of hospital patients while floodwaters rose. But that separation had come with costs I was only now beginning to fully calculate. By keeping my professional accomplishments hidden, I had allowed my family to fill the void with their own assumptions. To them I was a competent but unremarkable person doing decent but unexceptional work, someone who contributed to the family but did not shine, who could be safely overlooked or dismissed because nothing about me demanded attention or respect. And then Derek had come along and taken those assumptions to their logical conclusion. If I was unremarkable, then my ownership of valuable property was somehow unjust. If I was unexceptional, then his needs and his family's needs naturally superseded my own. If nothing about me demanded respect, then he could speak to me the way he had spoken last night without consequences. I stopped running and stood at the edge of the surf, letting the cold water wash over my feet while I watched the fog begin to thin as sunrise approached. The physical discomfort of the cold water helped ground me, pulling me out of my spiraling thoughts and back into my body. This was an old technique from my training, using physical sensation to interrupt mental loops and restore presence. The truth was that Derek's words had hurt precisely because they touched on something I had wondered about myself for years. Did I matter to my family? Not as a convenient supporting character in their lives, but as a full person worthy of being known and understood? I had told myself the answer was yes, that they loved me even if they did not fully comprehend me, that family love did not require complete transparency. But love that depends on you remaining small and quiet and undemanding is not actually love. It is tolerance with conditions attached. And I had been tolerating the conditions for so long that I had almost forgotten I had the right to refuse them. The sun was starting to burn through the fog now, turning the gray world golden. I could see other early morning walkers appearing on the beach, people with dogs or coffee cups or simply the need to be outside before the day's heat arrived. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the kinds of experiences that lived in my memory. I thought about a conversation I had once had with Patricia-chan, back when we were working the Paradise evacuation and I was approaching my breaking point around hour 60 without sleep. She had found me outside the command center, standing alone in the parking lot while ash fell around us like snow, and she had asked me a question that had stayed with me ever since. What are you afraid of, Julia? What is the worst thing that could happen if you let people see who you really are? I had not been able to answer her then, but standing on the beach in Carmel with Derek's words still echoing in my mind, I thought I finally understood what I had been afraid of. I had been afraid that if my family saw the full scope of what I did and who I was, they would expect me to be that person all the time. I had been afraid that I would lose the one space in my life where I could be ordinary. I had been afraid that their pride in my accomplishments would somehow be more exhausting than their indifference. But that fear had allowed something worse to grow in its place. It had allowed people like Derek to dismiss me entirely, to speak to me with contempt, to treat my boundaries as obstacles to be bulldozed rather than limits to be respected. And it had taught my family that I was someone whose feelings and needs could be safely deprioritized because I would never make a fuss about it. I turned and started jogging back toward the house, my decision crystallizing with each step. I was not going to hide anymore. Not because I needed their validation or approval, not because I wanted to prove Derek wrong out of petty vindictiveness, but because I deserved to be fully known by the people who claimed to love me. And if being fully known meant they had to adjust their comfortable assumptions about who I was, then that adjustment was long overdue. The house was starting to wake up when I returned. I could hear movement in the kitchen, the sound of coffee being made and cabinet doors opening and closing. I showered quickly and dressed in jeans and a simple gray sweater, then made my way to the kitchen to face whatever the morning would bring. Mom was alone in the kitchen, measuring coffee grounds with the concentration she brought to all domestic tasks. She looked up when I entered, her expression uncertain in a way that made her seem older and more fragile than usual. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said quietly. "You were up early." "I went for a run," I said, pouring myself water from the filter pitcher. "Needed to clear my head." She nodded, spooning coffee into the machine with careful precision. "About last night," she began then stopped, apparently unsure how to continue. I waited, giving her space to find her words. "Derek can be very intense," she said finally, which was almost exactly what Dad had said the night before. It seemed to be the family's agreed-upon euphemism for acknowledging his behavior without actually criticizing it. "He means well, but sometimes he expresses himself poorly. He told me I do not matter as much as the rest of you," I said, keeping my voice level. "That was not poor expression. That was exactly what he meant." Mom flinched slightly. "I am sure he did not mean it that way." "Mom," I said gently. I was standing right there. "I know what he meant." She turned away to start the coffee maker, her shoulders tight with discomfort. My mother had built her entire life around avoiding conflict and maintaining family harmony. The idea that one of her children might be genuinely hurt by another family member created cognitive dissonance she did not know how to resolve. Her instinct was to smooth things over, to reinterpret harsh words as misunderstandings, to ask the injured party to be the bigger person and let it go. "He was probably just stressed," Mom said, still not looking at me. "You know how he gets when he feels like his family is not being prioritized. He is very protective of Vanessa and the kids. Being protective does not give him the right to demand I leave my own house," I said. Now she did turn, her expression pleading. He did not really mean that either. He was just frustrated and said things he did not mean. If you would just apologize for being confrontational, I am sure he would apologize too and we could all move past this. There it was. The request that I apologize for defending my boundaries so that Derek could save face by offering a reciprocal apology for trampling them. The familiar family dynamic where the person who refused to be bulldozed was somehow equally culpable as the person doing the bulldozing. No, I said quietly. Mom blinked. No. I am not apologizing. I did nothing wrong. Derek demanded access to my property, and when I refused, he verbally attacked me. Those are the facts. I am not going to pretend otherwise to make everyone more comfortable. Julia, Mom said, her voice taking on that particular tone that meant she was about to explain why I was being unreasonable. Family means compromising sometimes. It means putting aside pride for the sake of unity. You have always had trouble with that. You have always needed to be right more than you needed to be connected. The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to feel plausible. I had always been the family member who would not simply go along to get along, who would quietly but firmly refuse to pretend everything was fine when it was not. But Mom was framing that as a character flaw, a stubborn need to be right, when what it actually represented was a refusal to be erased. Mom, I said carefully, do you know what I actually do for work? She looked startled by the change of subject. Of course I do. You work in emergency management. You coordinate responses to disasters. Do you know what that means specifically? Do you know what my qualifications are, or what kind of situations I respond to, or what my role actually entails? She frowned slightly, clearly unsure where I was going with this. Well, not the technical details, no. But I know you help people when bad things happen. That is good work, Julia. No one is saying it is not. But you do not actually know what it looks like, I pressed. You do not know what I have done or what I am capable of doing. You have a general sense that I do something helpful in the disaster management field, but the specifics are vague to you. I suppose so, she admitted, sounding defensive now. But you have never exactly been forthcoming about it either. You are always so private about your work. How are we supposed to know details you never share? She was not wrong about that. I had maintained my privacy carefully, had deflected questions and changed subjects, and generally made it clear that my professional life was not up for family discussion. But I had assumed they would at least be curious enough to look beyond my deflections, to recognize that someone who traveled constantly for high-level consulting work and maintained clearances for government contracts might be doing something more significant than they imagined. You are right, I said. I have been private. But Mom, have you ever wondered why I own this beach house? Have you ever done the math on what a property like this costs and wondered how someone with what you think is my career could afford it? She looked uncomfortable now. I assumed you had saved well, or maybe gotten a good deal on it. This house cost $850,000, I said. I paid cash. No mortgage. I also own a condo in San Francisco that I paid $400,000 for, also cash. I drive a modest car and live simply by choice, not necessity. My consulting rate is $750 per hour, and I work with clients who consider that rate reasonable because of my credentials and track record. Mom stared at me, the coffee maker gurgling behind her forgotten. I did not know, she said finally, her voice small. I know you did not, I said. And that is partly my fault for not being more transparent. But it is also because no one ever asked. No one ever looked at the gap between what you thought I was and what the evidence suggested and wondered if maybe you did not have the full picture. What are you saying, Julia? I am saying that Derek thinks he can dismiss me because you all think I am someone who does not matter very much. And you think that because I let you think it. But the truth is that I have spent the last decade becoming very good at work that matters enormously. I have credentials and experience that most people in my field spend lifetimes trying to achieve. I have made decisions that saved hundreds of lives. And none of you know that because I never corrected your assumptions. The coffee maker beeped, signaling completion. Neither of us moved to pour any. Why are you telling me this now? Mom asked quietly. Because Derek crossed a line last night, and I am not going to let it stand. Because I am tired of being treated like I am less important than everyone else. Because I deserve to be known by my own family, really known. not just tolerated as some puzzling outlier who does not quite fit the family template. Mom looked genuinely distressed now, her face crumpling slightly. We do know you, sweetheart. We love you. You love the version of me that stays quiet and does not make waves, I said, not unkindly. I am not sure how you will feel about the version of me that refuses to do that anymore. Before she could respond, we heard footsteps on the stairs. Vanessa appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed and made up despite the early hour. She looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Everything okay? She asked carefully. Fine, Mom said quickly, moving to pour coffee with shaking hands. Julia and I were just talking. Vanessa looked at me, her expression unreadable. We had been close as children back before life had pushed us in such different directions. She had been the outgoing one, the popular girl everyone wanted to befriend, while I had been the quiet younger sister content to observe from the margins. Somewhere along the way we had stopped really talking to each other, settling instead into a surface relationship built on polite updates and carefully neutral topics. Derek feels terrible about last night, Vanessa said, though her tone suggested this was something she felt obligated to say rather than something she necessarily believed. He was stressed and said things he should not have said. Did he send you to tell me that? I asked. She flushed slightly. No. I am telling you on my own because I think you both need to move past this. He is willing to apologize if you are. I have nothing to apologize for, I said. Vanessa sighed, a sound heavy with exasperation. See, this is what I do not understand about you, Julia. Why do you always have to be so rigid? So uncompromising? Derek made a mistake, he is willing to own it, but you cannot just accept that and move on. You have to make it into this big dramatic thing. He demanded I leave my own house, I said. That is not a small mistake, Vanessa. That is a fundamental disrespect of my boundaries and my property rights. He was frustrated and spoke without thinking, she countered. It happens. People say things they do not mean when they are upset. The mature response is to recognize that and not hold grudges over momentary lapses. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and wondered when she had learned to make excuses for unacceptable behavior. Or maybe she had always done it and I had simply never paid close enough attention to notice. Her marriage to Derek had seemed happy from the outside, but I found myself wondering now what compromises she had made to maintain that appearance, what parts of herself she had learned to suppress or explain away to avoid conflict with a man who did not tolerate disagreement well. Vanessa, I said carefully, do you think what Derek said to me last night was okay? She shifted uncomfortably. I think it was unfortunate. That is not what I asked. Do you think it was okay for him to tell me I do not matter as much as the rest of you? To tell me I am selfish and small? To demand I leave my own property to make room for his family? He did not mean those things the way they sounded, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. How did he mean them? She did not answer, just looked at Mom as if seeking backup. Mom was staring into her coffee cup, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. I need to know, Vanessa, I pressed. Do you think I am selfish and small? Do you think your family has more right to this house than I do? Do you think I matter less than everyone else? Of course not, she said quickly. But I also think you are not being fair to Derek. He works hard to provide for us. He has a lot of pressure on him. Sometimes he says things he does not mean because he is carrying so much stress. So I should just accept being insulted and having my boundaries violated because he is stressed, I said flatly. I am saying you should have some compassion, Vanessa shot back. Some understanding that not everything is about you and your feelings. Some recognition that maintaining family relationships requires flexibility and forgiveness. There was a long silence. From upstairs I could hear the kids starting to wake up, their voices carrying through the old house. Soon everyone would be up and the day would begin in earnest, and whatever was going to happen would happen. I am going to go make some calls, I said, setting down my water glass. You should probably tell Derek that I am not leaving and I am not apologizing. What he does with that information is up to him. I walked out of the kitchen before either of them could respond, heading back to my bedroom where my phone and laptop waited. I had work to do, pieces to move into place, a plan to execute that would change everything about how this weekend would unfold. Patricia Chun had given me a phone number last night, Someone I needed to call if I wanted certain doors to open quickly. I sat on my bed and dialed, listening to it ring while I watched fog wisps dissolve in the morning sun outside my window. A man answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "This better be important if you are calling me before 7 on a Saturday morning." "Chief Brennan," I said. "This is Julia Morrison. Patricia Chin gave me your number. I hope this is not too early, but I have a situation that requires your expertise." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Julia Morrison. I wondered when I would hear from you again. Last time we spoke you were turning down a job offer that would have doubled your salary." "I remember," I said, smiling slightly. "You told me I was making a mistake." "You were," he said, sounding more awake now. "But Patricia said you are principled to the point of stubbornness, so I was not surprised." "What situation are we talking about?" I explained briefly what I needed, keeping it factual and direct. Chief Brennan had retired from the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection 2 years ago, but maintained extensive connections throughout the state's emergency management network. If anyone could make what I needed happen on short notice, it was him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, most people would just tell their family who they are and what they have done. You are orchestrating an entire production." "I tried the quiet approach for years," I said. "It did not work. Sometimes people need to see evidence they cannot dismiss or explain away." "Fair enough," he said. "Give me 2 hours. I will make some calls." We hung up, and I sat for a moment feeling the weight of what I had set in motion. There was no going back from this. By the end of the day, my family would know exactly who I was and what I had accomplished. The comfortable fiction of Julia Morrison, unremarkable middle manager in the disaster response field, would be completely shattered. I thought I should feel nervous about that prospect. Instead, I mostly felt relieved. The truth was going to come out one way or another. I was simply choosing to control the timing and the context rather than letting it emerge accidentally in some even messier way. Outside my window, the fog had burned off completely now. The day was going to be beautiful, all blue sky and golden sun and the endless Pacific stretching to the horizon. Inside the house I could hear my family moving around, starting their day, completely unaware that by the time the sun set again everything between us would have fundamentally changed. I stood up and began getting ready for what was coming. There was work to do, and I had spent enough of my life waiting quietly in the margins while other people determined my worth. Today, Derek would regret demanding I leave my beach house. But more than that, today my family would finally meet the person I had always been beneath the careful privacy and the deflected questions. Whether they liked that person remained to be seen, but at least they would finally know her. The deck had become my refuge by mid-morning, a place where I could sit with my coffee and watch the ocean while the house behind me filled with the complicated energy of people trying to pretend nothing was wrong. I had positioned myself in one of the weathered Adirondack chairs that faced the water, my phone on the armrest beside me, waiting for the calls I knew would come. The kids were playing in the sand below, their voices carrying up on the salt-scented breeze. Madison was directing Connor in the construction of an elaborate sand castle, her 8-year-old authority absolute as she explained the proper technique for building turrets that would not collapse. Watching them, I felt a pang of something complicated and tender. They were innocent in all of this, caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts they could not possibly understand. I heard the sliding door open behind me but did not turn around. Footsteps crossed the deck, measured and deliberate, and then someone settled into the chair beside mine. I glanced over to find my younger brother Marcus looking out at the ocean with the same contemplative expression I probably wore. "Hell of a night last night," he said after a moment, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," I agreed simply. Marcus had always been the easiest person in the family to be around. 5 years younger than me, he had grown up watching both Vanessa and me navigate our different relationships with parental expectations, and he had somehow managed to chart a course that borrowed from both approaches. He had pursued a career that satisfied our parents while maintaining enough independence to live life on his own terms. He worked as a structural engineer for a firm in Sacramento, made good money, had gotten engaged to a woman he genuinely seemed to love, and generally appeared content with the life he was building. More importantly, Marcus had always been observant in ways the rest of the family was not. He noticed things. He paid attention to undercurrents and unspoken dynamics. He asked questions when everyone else accepted surface explanations. Of everyone in the family, he was the one most likely to recognize that there was more to my life than what I had chosen to share. Derek was out of line, Marcus said now, still looking at the ocean rather than at me. What he said to you was inexcusable. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. Thank you for saying that. I should have said it last night, he continued. And now there was frustration in his voice directed at himself. I should have stood up and told him he had no right to talk to you that way, or to demand you leave your own house. But I froze. I just sat there like a coward while he attacked you. You are not a coward, I said gently. Confrontation is hard. Especially with family. Especially with someone like Derek who turns everything into a battle he has to win. Marcus shook his head, clearly not ready to let himself off the hook. Sarah wanted to say something. My fiancée, she was furious. She grew up with brothers who would never let anyone talk to their sister like that. But I asked her not to make waves, told her it would just make things worse. And then I watched you walk away with so much dignity it made me ashamed of myself. I reached over and touched his arm briefly. Marcus, you do not have to defend me from Derek. I can handle him. I know you can, he said, finally turning to look at me directly. That is kind of the point. You have always been able to handle things. Handle yourself. Handle difficult situations. Handle being underestimated by everyone in this family. But just because you can handle it does not mean you should have to. There was something in his tone that made me pay closer attention. What do you mean by that? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I mean that I have always known there was more to you than what you let the family see. I just never pushed because I figured if you wanted us to know more, you would tell us. But watching Derek dismiss you last night, watching Mom and Dad and Vanessa just accept his version of who you are, it made me realize that maybe your privacy has cost you more than any of us understood. What makes you think there is more to know? I asked, genuinely curious about what he had observed. Marcus smiled slightly. Julia, you own 2 properties worth well over $1 million combined. You travel constantly but never talk about where you go or what you do there. You have this beach house in one of the most expensive areas in California, but you never post about it on social media. Never invite friends here. Never use it the way normal people would use a vacation home. You disappeared for 3 weeks during the Paradise Fire, and when you came back you looked like you had aged 5 years. You have scars on your hands that look like burns, but you have never explained how you got them. And every time anyone asks you a direct question about your work, you change the subject so smoothly that most people do not even notice they never got an answer. I stared at him, genuinely surprised by the level of detail he had cataloged. You have been paying attention. Someone had to, he said. The rest of them are so caught up in their own narratives about who everyone is supposed to be that they stopped looking at who people actually are. But I have watched you, Julia. And I have always known that whatever you do, it matters. It matters in ways that probably dwarf anything the rest of us will ever accomplish. I just did not know the specifics. My phone buzzed on the armrest. I glanced down to see a text from Chief Brennan. Everything is arranged. 2 o'clock at Fire Station 19. Bring the family. This is going to be memorable. I set the phone back down and looked at Marcus, making a decision in that moment that I had not fully planned but that felt right. Do you want to know the specifics? He met my eyes and I saw both curiosity and something that looked like relief. Yes, I really do. So I told him. Not everything, because some of what I had done was still classified or restricted, but enough to paint an accurate picture. I told him about my credentials and certifications, about the disaster responses I had led, about the training programs I had developed for government agencies and multinational corporations. I told him about Paradise, about the 72 hours when I had functioned as the senior incident commander for the largest evacuation operation in California history. I told him about the decisions I had made in real time as the fire advanced, about the resources I had coordinated from 14 different agencies, about the 238 people whose names I knew because they had been trapped in situations where my decisions directly determined whether they lived or died. I told him about the commendations I had received and declined, about the job offers from FEMA and Homeland Security that would have required relocating to Washington and giving up the consulting independence I valued. I told him about the weeks after Paradise when I could not sleep because I kept running alternate scenarios in my head. wondering if different decisions would have saved the 85 people who had not made it out. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression shifting through surprise and something that looked like awe and finally settling into a kind of quiet understanding. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, just watching the waves roll in below us. "Jesus, Julia," he said finally, his voice rough. "All this time, all these years, and none of us knew." "I did not want you to know," I said simply. "I needed some part of my life that was separate from all of that, where I could just be normal Julia who does not have to carry the weight of life and death decisions or live up to anyone's expectations about what a disaster response expert should be like." "But that meant we never saw you," Marcus said. "Not really. We just saw this carefully constructed version that you let us see. And because that version seemed fine, seemed okay, we never looked deeper to see what it might be costing you to maintain it." "It was my choice," I reminded him. "I am not blaming anyone for respecting the boundaries I set." "No," he agreed. "But maybe we should have questioned those boundaries more. Maybe we should have wondered why someone as accomplished as you clearly are was so determined to hide those accomplishments from the people who are supposed to love you most." I did not have a good answer for that, so I just sipped my coffee and watched Madison show Connor how to use a stick to draw windows on the sandcastle towers. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked after a while. "About Derek, I mean. About all of this." "Something I probably should have done years ago," I said. "I am going to show them who I actually am. Let them see the evidence they cannot dismiss or explain away. And then we will find out whether they can handle the truth or whether they prefer the comfortable fiction." Marcus nodded slowly. "Do you need backup? Sarah and we could stay close. Make sure this does not get ugly." "It is going to get ugly no matter what," I said honestly. "But yes, I would appreciate having you there. You and Sarah both. I think it will matter to have at least one family member who already knows the truth and can confirm I am not exaggerating or making things up." "When?" he asked. I checked my phone again, confirming the time. "This afternoon. 2 o'clock. Chief Brennan is arranging something at the fire station. He said to bring the family." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "Chief Brennan as in the former Cal Fire chief? That Chief Brennan?" "Yes. We worked together during several major incidents. He owes me some favors, and he is cashing them in today to help make a point." "This is really happening," Marcus said, and he sounded somewhere between excited and nervous. "You are really going to blow up the entire family dynamic in one afternoon." "The family dynamic was already broken," I said. "I am just going to stop pretending it is not. There is a difference." He laughed, a sound with more admiration than humor in it. "You know what? Good. Good for you. Derek has been insufferable since the day Vanessa married him. And everyone has just tolerated it, because confronting him felt like too much work. Maybe it is time someone showed him that his version of reality is not the only one that matters." We sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the ocean and the children and the steady passage of morning into afternoon. I felt grateful for Marcus in that moment, grateful that at least one person in my family had been paying close enough attention to know that I was more than I appeared, even if he had not known the specifics until now. The sliding door opened again, and this time it was Sarah, Marcus's fiancée, who stepped out onto the deck. She was a petite woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, an environmental scientist who worked for the State Water Board. I had always liked her, appreciated her directness and the way she seemed genuinely unimpressed by the status games that consumed so much of my family's energy. "I am interrupting," she said, looking between us. "No," Marcus said quickly. "Come here. Julia just told me something you need to hear." Sarah came over and perched on the armrest of Marcus's chair, and at his urging I gave her the abbreviated version of what I had told him. She listened with the same focused attention she probably brought to analyzing water quality data, asking occasional clarifying questions that showed she was really processing what I was saying rather than just waiting for her turn to talk. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. "That explains so much," she said. "I have been so confused about your family dynamics. The way they talk about you, it never matched what I could see with my own eyes. They treated you like you were nice but kind of aimless, but everything about you screamed competence and purpose. I kept telling Marcus there had to be more to the story." "You were right," Marcus said, squeezing her hand. There was a lot more. And now Derek has stepped in it spectacularly, Sarah added, a note of satisfaction in her voice. He has no idea what is coming, does he? None, I confirmed. By this afternoon he is going to realize that the person he tried to evict from her own house is someone he should have treated with considerably more respect. Sarah grinned, fierce and approving. I cannot wait to see his face. That man has needed to be taken down about 12 pegs since the day I met him. The way he talks to Vanessa, the casual dismissiveness toward anyone he thinks is beneath him, it has always made me furious. But Vanessa just accepts it, and your parents enable it, and Marcus and I have been too new to the family to feel like we could say anything. You are not too new anymore, I said. And after today, I think the rules about what can and cannot be said in this family are going to change significantly. We heard raised voices from inside the house then, Derek's distinctive bark cutting through the general morning noise. All three of us tensed, instinctively preparing for another confrontation. But the voices faded without escalating, and after a moment the house settled back into uneasy quiet. How are you really doing with all this? Sarah asked me, her voice gentle now. Not the strategic planning part, but the emotional part. Having your family fundamentally misunderstand you for years. Having your brother-in-law speak to you the way he did last night. That cannot be easy, regardless of how calm you seem on the surface. I appreciated the question, appreciated that she was asking about my actual feelings rather than just treating this as an interesting drama to observe. Honestly, it hurts. It has always hurt, watching them make assumptions about me and never questioning those assumptions. Listening to Derek talk about my work like it is some minor administrative job anyone could do. Seeing them value Vanessa's conventional success so much more than anything I have accomplished. But the hurt is mixed with anger now, and the anger is actually clarifying. It is helping me see that I have enabled this situation by staying quiet. I let them underestimate me because it was easier than being fully seen. But that stops today. Good, Sarah said firmly. Because from what you have just told us, you are extraordinary at what you do. And extraordinary people should not have to hide themselves to make ordinary people comfortable. The statement was so straightforward and supportive that I felt unexpected tears prick at my eyes. I blinked them back, but not before Sarah noticed. She reached over and squeezed my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that communicated more than words could. We have got your back today, Marcus said. Whatever happens, however the family reacts, you are not alone in this. Sarah and I, we see you. We know who you are now, and we are going to make sure everyone else sees it too. I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady if I tried to speak. Having allies suddenly felt crucial in a way I had not fully appreciated before. I had spent so many years handling things on my own, maintaining my independence and self-sufficiency, that I had forgotten what it felt like to have people in your corner who genuinely understood what you were facing. We sat together on the deck for another half hour, talking through logistics for the afternoon and making sure Marcus and Sarah understood what I was trying to accomplish. They asked good questions, pointed out potential complications I had not fully considered, and offered suggestions about how to handle various family members who might react defensively to having their assumptions challenged. Around 11:30, Dad came out looking for Marcus to help with something involving the grill, and our private conference broke up. I stayed on the deck alone after they left, using the quiet time to mentally prepare for what was coming. In my professional life, I was accustomed to high-pressure situations where clear thinking and steady nerves were essential. But this felt different. This was personal in ways that natural disasters and emergency evacuations were not. My phone rang and I saw Patricia Chen's name on the screen. I answered immediately. "Chief Brennan called me," she said without preamble. "He told me what you are doing today. I think it is brilliant. I also think it is about 5 years overdue." "Better late than never," I said. "Is Derek really as bad as you described?" Patricia asked. "Or were you exaggerating for effect when we talked last night?" "He is worse," I said honestly. "Last night was not an isolated incident. It is just the first time he has gone after me directly enough that I could not ignore it anymore." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You know what I have always admired about you, Julia? Your ability to stay calm in situations where other people lose their minds. But sometimes I worry that you are too good at staying calm. That you absorb disrespect and boundary violations because you can handle it, so you do, even when you should not have to. That is a fair assessment, I admitted. I have definitely let things slide that I should have addressed directly. Well, today you are addressing them, Patricia said with satisfaction. And when you are done, if Derek still does not understand who you are and what you have accomplished, I will personally fly down there and explain it to him in terms even his sales-addled brain can comprehend. I laughed despite myself. I appreciate the offer, but I think Chief Brennan's demonstration will be sufficiently clear. Good. Call me tonight and tell me how it went. I want all the details about his face when he finally understands what he has done. We hung up, and I sat for a few more minutes watching the ocean and gathering my thoughts. The water was deep blue under the afternoon sun, dotted with sailboats and a few brave surfers taking advantage of the relatively calm conditions. It looked peaceful and eternal, completely indifferent to the human dramas unfolding along its shores. I thought about all the times I had come to this deck seeking exactly that sense of perspective, that reminder that my problems were small against the vast backdrop of nature and time. It had helped most of the time, but today I did not want to feel small. Today I wanted to claim space, to take up room, to insist on being seen fully rather than diminishing myself to fit into other people's comfortable assumptions. The sliding door opened once more, and I turned to see Vanessa stepping out. She looked hesitant, uncertain in a way that was unusual for her. Vanessa typically moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had always been told she was special, who had never seriously doubted her place or her worth. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I gestured to the chair Marcus had vacated. "Of course." She sat down, smoothing her sundress over her knees in a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. For a moment neither of us spoke, just sat there listening to the distant sound of the waves and the children playing below. "I do not know how to fix this," Vanessa said finally. "Between you and Derek, I mean. Between you and all of us, really. It feels like something broke last night and I do not know how to put it back together." "Maybe it needed to break," I said gently. "Maybe we have been holding together something that was already fractured, just pretending the cracks were not there." She looked at me, her expression pained. "Is that really how you see this family? Fractured and broken?" "I see a family where one person's needs and feelings consistently get prioritized over another person's boundaries," I said. "Where keeping the peace means asking the less aggressive person to yield, rather than asking the aggressive person to show basic respect. Where assumptions about people's worth go unchallenged for years because questioning them would be uncomfortable." Vanessa flinched. "You are talking about Derek." "I am talking about all of us," I said. "Derek is just the most obvious example of a larger pattern, but we all participate in it. You by making excuses for his behavior. Mom and Dad by avoiding conflict at all costs. Me by staying quiet and letting everyone believe I am someone I am not." "Who are you then?" Vanessa asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice mixed with something that might have been fear. "Because I thought I knew my sister, but this version of you feels like a stranger." "I am the same person I have always been," I said. "You just never asked enough questions to see past the surface." She absorbed that in silence, her fingers pleating the fabric of her dress in patterns that matched the rhythm of the waves below. "Derek thinks you are being deliberately difficult," she said after a moment. "He thinks you are punishing him for last night by refusing to accept his apology or move past it." "Derek has not apologized," I pointed out. "You apologized on his behalf, which is not the same thing. And even if he did apologize, that would not erase what he said or change the fundamental disrespect underlying it." "What do you want, Julia?" Vanessa asked, and now there was frustration creeping into her voice. "Do you want him to grovel? Do you want the whole family to choose sides? Do you want to blow everything up just to prove a point?" "I want to be seen," I said simply. "By my own family. I want them to know who I actually am instead of who they have decided I must be based on limited information and lazy assumptions. And I want Derek to understand that he does not get to talk to me the way he did last night without consequences." Vanessa stood up abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth of the day. "I do not know if I can give you that. I do not know if any of us can. You have been hiding yourself for so long that expecting us to suddenly see and understand everything feels unfair." Then watch what happens this afternoon, I said. I am not hiding anymore. And after today, you will all have a choice about whether you want to know the real me, or whether you prefer the comfortable fiction. But either way, the choice will be conscious instead of just happening by default. She looked at me for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. Then she turned and walked back into the house without another word, leaving me alone on the deck once more. I checked my phone. It was almost noon. 2 more hours until everything changed. 2 more hours until my family would have to reconcile the Julia Morrison they thought they knew with the Julia Morrison who actually existed. I stood up and stretched, feeling the tension in my shoulders and back from holding myself so carefully controlled. Inside the house I could hear the sounds of lunch being prepared. Normal family noises that seemed surreal given what was building beneath the surface. Marcus appeared at the sliding door. "You should probably eat something," he said. "Long afternoon ahead." "In a minute," I said. "I just need a few more moments out here." He nodded and disappeared back inside. I stood at the railing looking out at the Pacific, thinking about all the times I had stood in exactly this spot seeking peace or clarity, or just a break from whatever crisis I was managing. The ocean had never failed to provide perspective, to remind me that I was small and temporary against the backdrop of something vast and enduring. But today I did not want to feel small. Today I wanted to feel exactly as large as my accomplishments warranted, as significant as my experience had earned me the right to be. The fog was starting to gather on the horizon again, the first hints of the evening marine layer that would roll in later. But for now the sky was clear and bright, and the day stretched ahead full of possibility and reckoning. I went inside to join my family for lunch, knowing it would be the last meal we shared before everything changed between us forever. Lunch was a study in forced normalcy, everyone moving through the motions of a family meal, while carefully avoiding the subjects that actually mattered. Dad had grilled chicken and vegetables, and Mom had arranged everything on platters with the kind of meticulous attention to presentation that she used as armor against uncomfortable emotions. We gathered around the dining table I had purchased specifically for occasions like this, the irony not lost on me that we were using my furniture in my house while Derek silently fumed at one end of the table about my refusal to surrender both. Derek had positioned himself strategically, taking the head of the table as if the seating arrangement might establish some kind of dominance he could not achieve through actual authority. He was pointedly not looking at me, directing all his conversation toward Dad and occasionally Marcus, performing the role of engaged son-in-law and family man while pretending I simply did not exist. It was a calculated insult, the kind of social punishment that someone like Derek excelled at delivering. Vanessa sat beside him, pushing food around her plate and contributing little to the conversation. She looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, the kind of weariness that comes from constant emotional management and the endless work of maintaining appearances. I wondered, not for the first time, what her marriage actually looked like when no one else was watching, whether Derek's need for control and dominance extended into their private life, or whether he reserved that behavior for public performances. Madison and Connor provided most of the actual conversation, talking over each other to describe the sandcastle they had built, and the shells they had collected and the crab they had found hiding under a rock. Their excitement was genuine and infectious, a reminder that children exist in a different emotional universe than adults, one where yesterday's conflicts do not cast shadows over today's discoveries. "Aunt Julia," Madison said suddenly, turning her attention to me for the first time since we had sat down, "why do you have so many books about fires and earthquakes and floods? I saw them in your office." The question landed in the middle of the table like an unexploded device. Everyone stopped eating, suddenly interested in my answer despite their previous determination to maintain surface-level chit-chat about nothing consequential. "Those are workbooks," I said simply. "I study disasters so I can help people respond to them effectively." "But why?" Connor asked with the straightforward curiosity of a 6-year-old, who had not yet learned that some questions made adults uncomfortable. "Why do you want to learn about bad things?" "Because bad things happen whether we want them to or not," I explained, speaking directly to him rather than to the adults who were listening with careful attention while pretending not to. "And when they happen, people need help. Someone has to know what to do, how to organize the response, how to make sure everyone gets to safety. That is what I do. I am one of the people who figures out how to help when everything is falling apart." "Like a superhero," Madison said decisively, as if this settled an important question in her mind. Derek made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh, or might have been something more dismissive. Not quite like a superhero, sweetie, he said to his daughter. Aunt Julia does important work coordinating logistics and resources, but that is more like being a really good organizer than being a superhero. I felt Marcus tense beside me, saw Sarah's hand move to his leg under the table in a gesture that clearly meant not yet, let it go for now. They were right, of course. This was not the moment to engage, not when the real demonstration was coming in just a few hours. Organizing saves lives, I said mildly. When a disaster happens, having the right resources in the right place at the right time is the difference between people surviving or not surviving. So yes, it is organizing. But it is organizing that matters. Of course it matters, Derek said smoothly, his tone condescending in that particular way he had perfected. All work matters in its own way. Some work just happens to be more visible, more directly impactful than other work. That is not a value judgment, just a recognition that there is a hierarchy of significance in any field. And where does disaster response fall in your hierarchy? I asked, keeping my voice level and curious rather than confrontational. He shrugged, apparently pleased to have been asked to share his wisdom on the subject. I would say middle tier. Important infrastructure work, certainly. Someone has to do it. But it is not the kind of work that changes the world or builds industries or creates significant economic value. It is more reactive than proactive, more about managing problems than creating solutions. I watched him as he spoke, observing the absolute confidence with which he delivered his assessment of a field he knew nothing about. This was Derek's particular gift and curse, the ability to speak with complete authority on subjects he had never studied, reducing complex domains of expertise to simplistic frameworks that confirmed his pre-existing beliefs about what kinds of work mattered and what kinds of people deserved respect. That is an interesting perspective, I said, not agreeing or disagreeing, just acknowledging that he had spoken. Dad tried to change the subject to something safer, asking Marcus about his engineering work on a bridge project in Sacramento. The conversation shifted, and we finished the meal with discussions of construction timelines and environmental impact assessments, topics that had the virtue of being emotionally neutral enough that everyone could participate without risking another confrontation. After lunch, I retreated to my office, the smallest bedroom in the house that I had converted into a workspace. 3 walls were lined with bookshelves containing the technical library Madison had noticed, hundreds of volumes on emergency management, disaster psychology, incident command systems, hazardous materials response, urban planning, and every other subject relevant to my field. My desk held 2 large monitors and the kind of advanced communication equipment that allowed me to coordinate responses from anywhere with an internet connection. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the files I would need for this afternoon. Chief Brennan had sent detailed information about what he had arranged, and I needed to review everything to make sure I understood the sequence of events and could guide my family through the experience effectively. There was a soft knock on the door frame, and I looked up to find Sarah standing there, taking in the office with obvious interest. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." She stepped inside and immediately moved to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines of books with titles like Incident Command System for High-Rise Structures and Mass Casualty Management in Austere Environments and Psychological First Aid in Disaster Response. "This is not the library of someone doing middle-tier infrastructure work," Sarah observed, pulling out a volume and flipping through it. "This is the library of someone who has spent years becoming an expert in a highly specialized and critically important field." "Yes," I agreed simply. She replaced the book and turned to face me. "Marcus told me about some of the certifications you mentioned. I looked them up while you were making coffee this morning. Do you know how few people hold all the credentials you have? I found statistics. In the entire United States, there are fewer than 200 people with your combination of qualifications. You are not just competent at what you do, Julia. You are in the top fraction of 1% of people working in emergency management." "That sounds about right," I said, uncomfortable with the direct praise in a way that probably revealed more about me than I wanted to acknowledge. "And your family has no idea," Sarah continued, not as a question but as a statement of observed fact. "They think you are a mid-level coordinator doing decent but unremarkable work. The disconnect is staggering." It is, I agreed. But it was my choice to maintain that disconnect. I cannot entirely blame them for believing what I let them believe. Sarah sat down in the chair across from my desk, studying me with the directness she brought to everything. Can I ask you something that might be too personal? You can ask. I might not answer, but you can ask. Why did you let them underestimate you for so long? I understand wanting privacy about your work. I understand not wanting to brag or make everything about your accomplishments. But there is a difference between humility and hiding. You crossed that line years ago. Why? I leaned back in my chair, considering how to answer a question I had been asking myself with increasing frequency lately. I think it started as a reasonable boundary and then became a habit and then eventually became an identity I did not know how to step out of. In the beginning, right after I started doing this work, I genuinely needed separation between my professional life and my personal life. The work was intense, sometimes traumatic. I saw things and made decisions that I could not process while also maintaining normal family relationships. So I created this division where work Julia and family Julia were almost separate people. But that division stopped serving you at some point, Sarah suggested. Yes. Probably around the time Derek entered the picture, if I am being honest. Before Vanessa married him, my family's lack of understanding about my work was more benign. They did not really get what I did, but they were vaguely proud of me anyway. In that unfocused way families are when they know you are doing something good even if they do not understand the details. But Derek measures worth very differently. To him, if your work is not highly visible and highly compensated and highly prestigious in ways he recognizes, then it does not count for much. And once he started treating me as less significant than other family members, everyone else just kind of accepted that framework. Because you did not correct it, Sarah said. Because I did not correct it, I confirmed. And the longer I let it continue, the harder it became to imagine correcting it without it seeming like I was being defensive or trying to prove something. It felt easier to just let them think what they thought and maintain my peace of mind by not engaging. Except that it was not actually maintaining your peace of mind, Sarah pointed out. It was costing you something. Maybe not something you noticed day to day, but it was accumulating. And last night Derek pushed you past the point where you could keep absorbing that cost. I nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her analysis. He made me realize that my privacy had become a kind of prison, that by protecting myself from being fully seen, I had created a situation where people who should know me did not know me at all. And that made it possible for someone like Derek to treat me with contempt because there was no counterweight of knowledge or understanding to make him reconsider. So today you are providing that counterweight, Sarah said. Today I am blowing up the entire carefully constructed fiction and letting everyone see what was always there underneath. And yes, part of that is about Derek and making sure he understands he picked the wrong person to dismiss. But it is also about me deciding I do not want to be partially invisible anymore, even to people who are supposed to love me. Sarah smiled, warm and approving. Good. You should not have to be invisible to be comfortable in your own family. That is backwards. We talked for a few more minutes about the afternoon ahead, and then Sarah left me alone to finish my preparations. I pulled up the files Chief Brennan had sent and reviewed them carefully, making notes about timing and logistics. Everything was arranged precisely, and if I guided my family through the experience the way I had planned, by the end of the afternoon they would have a comprehensive understanding of who I actually was and what I had actually accomplished. At 1:30 I changed clothes, trading my casual jeans and sweater for what I thought of as my professional uniform. Dark tactical pants, a fitted long-sleeved shirt in navy blue, and boots designed for emergency response work. I pulled my hair back in a tight braid and checked my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was not family Julia, the quiet sister who stayed in the background and never made waves. This was Commander Morrison, the person who walked into disaster zones and took charge of chaos. I found my family gathered in the living room, sprawled across furniture and looking like people who had settled in for a lazy beach afternoon. Derek was reading something on his phone, Vanessa was flipping through a magazine, Mom and Dad were working on a jigsaw puzzle at the coffee table, and the kids were watching a movie. "We need to go," I said from the doorway. Everyone looked up, and I saw the exact moment when they registered my change in appearance. I looked different enough that it created a brief moment of cognitive dissonance, their minds trying to reconcile familiar Julia with this more authoritative version. "Go where?" Dad asked, setting down a puzzle piece. Fire Station 19 in Carmel Valley. I have arranged a demonstration that I think you will all find educational. Derek frowned, finally looking directly at me for the first time all day. What kind of demonstration? I thought we were spending the afternoon at the beach. Plans change, I said simply. Everyone needs to be ready to leave in 10 minutes. Dress casually but wear closed-toe shoes. We will be touring an active fire station. Julia, I do not think this is a good time for whatever you are planning, Vanessa said, her voice tight with anxiety. Can we just have a normal afternoon? Please. No, I said, not unkindly but with absolute finality. We are doing this today. You can choose to come or not, but I am going regardless. Marcus and Sarah are already planning to attend. I saw Marcus nod in confirmation, standing up to demonstrate his support. Sarah moved to stand beside him, presenting a united front. I think we should go, Dad said unexpectedly. If Julia says it is important, then it probably is. She does not usually ask us to do things without good reason. Mom looked uncertain but nodded in agreement with Dad. I suppose an hour or two would not hurt. It might even be interesting. Derek clearly wanted to refuse, wanted to assert his authority by declining to participate in whatever I had planned. But with Dad and Mom already agreeing to go, and with his own children now excited at the prospect of visiting a fire station, he found himself outmaneuvered. He could refuse and look petty, or he could come along and maintain the appearance of being a cooperative family member. Fine, he said, standing up with obvious reluctance. But this better not be some elaborate attempt to prove a point, Julia. If you dragged us out here just to show off or make yourself look important, that is going to reflect very poorly on you. I am sure it will be educational for everyone, I said neutrally, not taking the bait. 20 minutes later we were loading into 3 vehicles for the drive to the fire station. I took my Subaru with just my work bag, preferring to drive alone and mentally prepare for what was coming. Marcus and Sarah rode together, and everyone else piled into Dad's SUV and Derek's Mercedes. The drive took 15 minutes, winding through the coastal hills of Carmel Valley, until we reached the fire station that served this part of the county. It was a modern facility, built just 5 years earlier to replace an older station that had been inadequate for the growing population and increasing fire risk in the area. I had consulted on the design of the new station, helping ensure that it could serve as an incident command post during major emergencies, though my family did not know that detail. Chief Brennan was waiting in front of the station when we arrived, standing beside 2 younger firefighters in full dress uniform. He was a man in his mid-60s, weathered and solid in that way that career firefighters often are, someone who had spent decades walking into buildings that everyone else was running out of. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile that spoke to years of mutual respect and shared experiences. Commander Morrison, he said formally as I approached, extending his hand. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. Thank you for arranging it on such short notice, Chief, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. Behind me I heard a small intake of breath from someone in my family, probably at hearing me addressed with a title they had never known I held. I did not turn around, just waited as everyone gathered around us in the parking lot. Chief Brennan addressed my family directly, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to being listened to in high-pressure situations. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Brennan. I served as chief of the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection for 12 years before retiring 2 years ago. I have been asked to provide you with some context about the work that Julia Morrison does and has done throughout her career. I am honored to do so because Julia is one of the finest emergency management professionals I have ever worked with, and frankly one of the finest people I have ever known. I saw confusion register on several faces. Dad looked between the chief and me as if trying to make the pieces fit together. Vanessa had gone very still, her expression carefully blank. Derek was frowning, clearly not understanding why a former Cal Fire chief would have any particular knowledge of my work, or why he would speak about me in such glowing terms. Before we begin the tour, Chief Brennan continued, I want to share some information that will help you understand what you are about to see. Julia Morrison holds more advanced certifications in emergency management and disaster response than anyone else currently working in California. She is qualified as a Type 1 incident commander, which is the highest level of certification available, and which fewer than 200 people in the entire country hold. She is certified in hazardous materials response, urban search and rescue coordination, mass casualty management, and approximately 15 other specialized areas that I will not bore you with listing completely. He paused, letting that information settle, watching my family's faces as they began to understand that whatever they had thought about my work was incomplete at best. Julia has led or coordinated response operations for 6 major disasters in the last decade. Chief Brennan continued. She has trained personnel from over 40 different agencies, both domestic and international. She has consulted on emergency response protocols for 3 foreign governments and more corporations than I can count. Her expertise is sought after globally, which is why she travels as much as she does. When something goes catastrophically wrong and people need the best possible chance of survival, Julia Morrison is one of the people who gets the call. I watched Derek's face as the chief spoke, saw the skepticism there mixed with growing confusion. He wanted to dismiss what he was hearing, wanted to find a way to minimize it or reframe it in terms that fit his existing understanding. But Chief Brennan's authority and specificity made that difficult. This was not someone Derek could dismiss as biased or misinformed. This was a man with decades of experience and a reputation that commanded respect, and he was speaking about me with an admiration that was impossible to ignore. The reason I asked you here today, Chief Brennan said, is because 2 years ago there was a fire. You probably remember it. The campfire that destroyed the town of Paradise. It was the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California history. 85 people died, and more than 18,000 structures were destroyed. It was catastrophic by any measure. Everyone nodded. They remembered. The fire had dominated news coverage for weeks, the images of apocalyptic destruction seared into public consciousness. What you probably do not know, Chief Brennan continued, his voice taking on a different quality now, is that the death toll would have been exponentially higher without the evacuation operation that Julia commanded. She served as the senior incident commander for the first 72 hours of the response, the most critical period when the fire was advancing rapidly and decisions had to be made in real time about which routes to use, which neighborhoods to evacuate first, how to manage traffic flow through limited corridors, and how to coordinate resources from 14 different agencies that had never worked together before. He gestured toward the fire station behind him. This facility is designed to function as an incident command post during major emergencies. Julia consulted on the design. She helped determine what communication systems we would need, how the space should be configured, what backup power requirements would be necessary. She did similar consulting work for 17 other stations throughout California. The protocols we use, the training our personnel receive, the systems that keep us coordinated during chaos, Julia helped create or refine almost all of it. I heard someone behind me make a soft sound, a kind of exhalation that suggested information overload. I still did not turn around, just stood beside Chief Brennan and watched my family begin to understand the scope of what they had never known about me. I want you to meet 2 people, Chief Brennan said, gesturing to the firefighters who had been standing quietly beside him. This is Captain Jennifer Ramos and Lieutenant Michael Tran. They both worked on the Paradise fire evacuation. They are here today to tell you what it was like to have Julia Morrison as their incident commander. Captain Ramos stepped forward, a woman in her 40s with the kind of steady competence that comes from years of running into dangerous situations while maintaining absolute professionalism. I have been a firefighter for 21 years, she began. I have worked dozens of major incidents. But the Paradise fire was different. It moved faster than anything I had ever seen. At one point we were watching the fire advance at a rate that meant we had maybe 20 minutes before it would overtake the evacuation route we were using. 20 minutes to get thousands of people to safety through a single road that was already gridlocked. She looked at me, and I saw the memory of that day in her eyes, the terror and the desperate calculations and the knowledge that people were going to die if we made the wrong choices. Commander Morrison was the calmest person in that command center, Captain Ramos continued. While everyone else was barely holding it together, while experienced firefighters were starting to panic, because we could all see that we might not get everyone out in time, she was making decisions with this incredible clarity. She redirected traffic using secondary routes that most of us did not even know existed. She repositioned resources to create safe zones for people who could not evacuate fast enough. She coordinated helicopter evacuations for the most vulnerable populations. And she did it all while maintaining this steady, confident presence that kept everyone else from falling apart. Lieutenant Tran spoke next, a younger man whose voice shook slightly as he recounted his experience. I carried a woman out of her house while the fire was visible through the windows. She was elderly, could not walk on her own, and I literally had to throw her over my shoulder and run. I got her to a truck and I radioed back to command that we were in danger of being cut off, that the fire was moving too fast. Commander Morrison's voice came through the radio, and I will never forget what she said. She said, "Lieutenant, I see your position. Route 42 is clear for exactly 8 more minutes. You will use Route 42 and you will make it out. I need you to trust me and move now." And I did. I drove that route and we made it out with maybe 3 minutes to spare. The fire closed that road right after we cleared it. He paused, composing himself. I found out later that she had made similar calls for dozens of other people that day, that she was tracking everyone's position in real time and calculating constantly how much time each group had before the fire overtook them. She was making life and death decisions every single minute for 72 hours straight, and somehow she got it right more times than should have been humanly possible. The silence that followed was absolute. My family stood frozen, taking in information that completely contradicted everything they thought they knew about my life and my work. Chief Brennan spoke again, his voice softer now but no less authoritative. Julia Morrison saved 238 lives during that evacuation that we know of, probably more that we will never be able to quantify. The governor of California personally called to thank her. She was recommended for the Presidential Medal of Freedom and declined it. She declined because she said the recognition should go to the firefighters who executed the operation, not the person coordinating it. That level of humility, that complete lack of need for public recognition, that is who Julia is. He turned to face Derek directly, and I saw something in his expression that made me think Patricia had given him more background about yesterday's confrontation than I had realized. "So when I hear that someone suggested Julia's work is middle tier," Chief Brennan said, his tone still respectful but with an edge now that cut through the afternoon air. "When I hear that someone implied her contributions are less significant than other forms of work, I feel compelled to provide some context. The work Julia does saves lives on a scale that most people cannot comprehend. The expertise she has built is irreplaceable. The respect she commands from professionals in her field is absolute. And anyone who underestimates her is revealing their own ignorance, not her lack of importance." Derek had gone pale, his expression cycling through shock and embarrassment, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Vanessa was openly crying, one hand pressed to her mouth. Dad looked like someone had hit him with a physical blow. Mom's face showed a complicated mixture of pride and grief, probably realizing how much of my life she had missed by never asking the right questions. "Now," Chief Brennan said, his tone shifting back to something warmer, "I would like to give you a tour of this facility and show you some of the systems that Julia helped design. And then we have a short video presentation that includes some footage from the Paradise Fire response that might help you understand what your daughter, your sister, your family member actually does when she goes to work." He gestured toward the station entrance, and we began moving as a group into the building. I walked beside Chief Brennan, letting him take the lead while I observed my family processing everything they had just learned. Marcus caught my eye and gave me a small nod that communicated support and something that looked like fierce pride. Sarah squeezed my arm as we passed, a gesture of solidarity. The tour lasted an hour, and throughout it Chief Brennan continued providing context about my work, pointing out specific systems and protocols I had influenced, sharing additional stories from other firefighters and emergency responders who had worked with me. He showed them the command center where incident commanders coordinated large-scale responses, the communication systems that allowed real-time coordination between multiple agencies, the backup power and redundant systems that ensured the facility could remain operational even during catastrophic events. My family asked no questions during the tour, just absorbed information with the kind of stunned silence that comes from having your entire understanding of reality suddenly inverted. Even the children were quiet, sensing that something significant was happening even if they did not fully understand what it was. Finally, we gathered in a small auditorium where Chief Brennan had prepared the video presentation. The lights dimmed and footage began playing on a large screen at the front of the room. Aerial shots of the Paradise Fire showing the terrifying speed with which it moved, consuming everything in its path. Ground-level footage of the evacuation. Long lines of cars moving through smoke so thick that headlights were barely visible. Audio recordings of radio communications from that day, including my own voice giving calm, clear directions to personnel who were operating in conditions of extreme danger and stress. The video included interviews with people who had been evacuated, families who described the terror of fleeing through fire with children and elderly relatives, who talked about the voice on the loudspeakers that told them which routes to take and kept reassuring them that help was coming. Several of them cried while describing what it had been like. The fear and the desperate hope, and the profound gratitude they felt toward the people who had coordinated their rescue. When the lights came back up, my family sat in stunned silence. Madison had climbed into Vanessa's lap at some point during the video, and Vanessa held her daughter tightly, tears still streaming down her face. Connor had moved to sit beside Mom, who had her arm around him in a protective gesture even though nothing in the video directly threatened them. Chief Brennan spoke one final time, his voice gentle now with the weight of everything that had been shared. I wanted you to see this because I think families should know who the people they love actually are. Not the versions we construct based on limited information or assumptions, but the real people with their real accomplishments and real sacrifices. Julia Morrison is extraordinary at what she does. She has dedicated her life to making sure that when the worst happens, people have the best possible chance of survival. That deserves to be known and honored, especially by the people who claim to love her. He looked at me and smiled, warm and paternal. Thank you for letting me do this, Julia. It was my honor. Thank you, Chief, I managed, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. I appreciate everything you arranged. We stood to leave, my family moving slowly as if they were still processing, still trying to reconcile everything they had learned with the Julia they thought they knew. As we walked back out to the parking lot, no one spoke. The silence was not hostile or uncomfortable, just heavy with the weight of revelation and the knowledge that nothing between us would ever be quite the same again. Derek had not said a word since Chief Brennan's initial introduction. He walked to his car alone, his shoulders hunched in a way that suggested he was carrying more than just the afternoon heat. Vanessa moved to follow him but then stopped, turning back to look at me with an expression I could not quite read. Julia, she said quietly, and then stopped, apparently unable to find words adequate to the moment. We can talk later, I said gently. Take your time processing. I know it is a lot. She nodded and turned away, herding the children toward Derek's car. Mom and Dad approached more slowly, and I could see that Dad's eyes were red in a way that suggested he had been crying during the video presentation. I am so sorry, Dad said, his voice breaking on the last word. I should have known. I should have asked. I should have paid attention instead of just assuming I understood. I hugged him, feeling his solid warmth and the tremble in his shoulders that spoke to genuine emotion. It is okay, Dad. I made it hard to know. That was my choice. But we should have tried harder, Mom said, joining the embrace. We should have looked past the surface and really seen you. You are seeing me now, I said. That is what matters. We stood together for a moment in the parking lot. 3 people beginning the difficult work of rebuilding understanding across years of disconnect. Finally, they pulled away and headed to their car, leaving me alone with Marcus and Sarah. Well, Marcus said, a note of awe in his voice. That was even more intense than I expected it to be. Chief Brennan does not do anything halfway, I agreed. Sarah was looking at me with an expression that mixed admiration and something that might have been concern. How are you doing? That had to be emotionally exhausting, watching your family learn the truth like that. I am okay, I said and realized I meant it. Relieved mostly. The secret is out. Whatever happens from here, at least it is happening based on reality rather than fiction. We drove back to the beach house separately, each of us needing time alone with our thoughts. The sun was lower in the sky now, the afternoon sliding toward evening. When I arrived home, I found my family had scattered to different parts of the house, seeking private space to process what they had learned. I went to my room and changed back into comfortable clothes, then returned to my desk to check messages and confirm various work commitments for the coming week. Normal work activities that helped ground me after the intensity of the afternoon. But even as I went through the familiar motions, I knew that everything had shifted. My family had finally seen who I actually was. And tomorrow we would begin the complicated work of figuring out what that meant for all of us moving forward. Derek, particularly, was going to have to reconcile his dismissive assessment of my work with the reality that had been so thoroughly demonstrated this afternoon. I found myself curious in a detached way about how he would handle that cognitive dissonance. The reckoning was far from over. In many ways it had only just begun. The house felt different when I emerged from my room an hour later. The physical structure remained unchanged, the same weathered shingles and salt-worn deck, the same furniture I had carefully selected over the years. But the atmosphere had transformed in ways both subtle and profound, as if the revelation at the fire station had altered the molecular composition of the air itself. People moved through the space with a new kind of awareness, a hesitance that came from recognizing they no longer understood the rules that governed our interactions. I found Dad alone on the deck, the same spot where Marcus and I had talked that morning. He was nursing a beer and staring out at the ocean, his posture conveying a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. I poured myself a glass of water from the kitchen and joined him outside, settling into the chair that had become my customary position during this strange, transformative weekend. "Your mother is lying down," Dad said without preamble. "She said she had a headache, but I think she just needed to process everything away from everyone else. She does that sometimes when things get overwhelming, retreats into herself until she can make sense of it all." "I understand that impulse," I said quietly. He nodded, taking a long pull from his beer before speaking again. "I keep trying to remember if there were signs. Moments when I should have known that what you were doing was bigger than what I imagined. And the thing is, there were signs. Dozens of them. I just never put them together because I had already decided who you were and what your life looked like. And once I made those decisions, I stopped actually looking at the evidence in front of me." "What kind of signs?" I asked, genuinely curious about what he had observed and dismissed. "The time you came to Thanksgiving 3 years ago and you had those burn scars on your forearms," he said. "You said you had been working on a controlled burn training exercise, and I accepted that explanation without questioning what kind of training would leave actual scars. Or the fact that you own properties worth well over $1 million, but you drive a car that is 7 years old and wear clothes from Target. That should have told me something about your priorities and your actual income level, but I just figured you were bad with money or overly frugal. Or the way you speak sometimes, with this precise clarity that sounds like someone who is accustomed to being listened to and obeyed. I noticed it, but I explained it away as just your personality rather than recognizing it as professional competence." He paused, turning the beer bottle in his hands. "And then there were the calls. The ones you would take even during family gatherings, stepping away to talk in private about things you never explained afterward. I assumed they were just routine work calls, the kind anyone might get. But they happened at odd hours, and you treated them with a level of seriousness that should have told me they were more significant than I imagined. You would come back from those calls and you would be different somehow. More focused. More intense. Like you had shifted into a different mode of being. And I saw it, Julia. I saw it, and I told myself it did not mean anything important." The confession landed between us, heavy with the weight of years of unexamined assumptions. I could hear the regret in his voice, the genuine sorrow of a parent recognizing how completely he had failed to truly see his own child. "Dad," I said gently, "I made it hard for you to see. That was deliberate. I created a version of myself that was comfortable for the family to interact with, and I maintained that version consistently enough that you had no reason to question it. You are not entirely at fault for believing what I presented as truth. But I am at fault for never being curious enough to look deeper," he countered. "A good parent pays attention. A good parent asks questions and actually listens to the answers instead of just hearing what confirms their existing beliefs. I failed at that. I failed you." The words hung in the salt air between us, and I found myself unexpectedly moved by his willingness to claim responsibility, rather than deflecting or minimizing. This was growth happening in real time. A man confronting his own blind spots with uncomfortable honesty. "There is something else I need to tell you," I said, making a decision in that moment to share information I had never intended to reveal to my family. Something that might help you understand why I kept my professional life so separate from my personal life for so long. Dad turned to look at me directly, and I saw both apprehension and readiness in his expression. Whatever I was about to share, he was prepared to receive it without flinching. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo album I kept password protected, the one that contained images from various disaster sites I had worked. I scrolled to a particular photograph taken during the Paradise Fire, a shot someone had captured of me in the Incident Command Center during hour 68 of continuous operation. I was standing in front of a massive digital map that showed the fire's progression in real time, one hand on a radio, the other pointing to something on the screen while I spoke to a group of firefighters gathered around me. But what the photograph really captured was the expression on my face. The exhaustion carved into every feature, the haunted quality in my eyes, the tension in my jaw from grinding my teeth for 3 straight days. I looked like someone who had been to war and was still fighting, still pushing forward through sheer force of will because stopping was not an option while people's lives depended on the decisions I made. "This is what I look like when I am doing my job," I said, handing him the phone. "This is the person I become when disaster strikes and I shift into incident command mode. And this is why I needed you and Mom and the rest of the family to only know the other version of me, the one who is not carrying this weight." Dad stared at the photograph for a long moment, his face working through complicated emotions. "You look like you are barely holding yourself together," he said finally, his voice rough. "I was barely holding myself together," I confirmed. By that point I had been awake for almost 3 full days. I had watched the death toll climb every time we got new reports from the field. I had made hundreds of decisions where the wrong choice would have meant more people dying. I had listened to radio traffic of firefighters describing conditions that terrified them, describing situations where they thought they might not make it out. And I had to stay calm and clear and authoritative through all of it because the moment I showed fear or uncertainty, everyone else would have fallen apart. I took the phone back and scrolled to another image, this one from a flood response in Texas 2 years earlier. In this photograph I was wading through waist-deep water, wearing a tactical vest and helmet, guiding a group of evacuees toward a rescue boat. My face was set in grim determination, focused entirely on the task at hand. "This is from the Houston floods," I said. "We were evacuating a nursing home where the residents could not be moved quickly. The water was rising faster than projected, and we had maybe 30 minutes before the building would be completely compromised. I went in with the rescue teams because we needed someone with incident command authority on site making real-time decisions about evacuation priorities. We got everyone out, but it was close. Too close." Dad looked at the second photograph, then back at me, and I saw him beginning to understand not just what I did but what it cost me to do it. The physical danger, yes, but more than that, the psychological burden of constant high-stakes decision-making under conditions where failure meant death. "How do you carry this?" he asked quietly. "How do you live with knowing that people's lives depend on you being right more often than you are wrong?" "Some days I carry it better than others," I admitted. "I have a therapist who specializes in working with emergency responders. I see her regularly, have for years, because this work does damage if you do not process it properly. I have colleagues I can talk to who understand what it is like. And I have places like this beach house where I can come and just be Julia Morrison, who owns a nice property and watches the sunset and does not have to think about worst-case scenarios for a few hours." "Or at least you used to," Dad said with a trace of bitterness, "until Derek decided your sanctuary should be his vacation home." "Yes," I agreed. "That is part of why his demand hit so hard. It was not just about the property or the disrespect. It was about him trying to take away one of the few spaces where I could exist as something other than Commander Morrison, who saves lives and carries the weight of impossible decisions." We sat in silence for a while, watching the waves roll in with their eternal patience. The sun was getting lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that photographers chase and poets try to capture in inadequate words. "Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us."